Hello, I'm John Groders. Welcome to the No Shame Podcast. If you ever find yourself overcommitted or just exhausted, perhaps you have trouble saying no. Today's guest is author, pastor, and speaker Kevin Harney with some practical advice from his brand new book, No is a Beautiful Word.
Have no shame, no, we are not afraid, no shame of the gospel of his name. It's the power of God by which we all are saved. We need not be afraid, no shame.
Hello and welcome to the No Shame Podcast. I'm John Groders. Our guest today is Kevin Harney, lead pastor at Shoreline Community Church, founder of Organic Outreach International, author of books and curriculum, sought-after teacher, speaker, and personal friend of mine. Reverend Dr. Kevin Harney, I know he hates it if I say that, but welcome to beautiful, snowy Michigan.
It is a joy to be here. Thanks for having me.
And it is beautiful and snowy outside. Well, Kevin, I know that in front of us is this brand new book. It has just recently kind of hit the stores, and I was privileged enough to read a manuscript of this a couple of months ago, back in November, and it's the title of this book is called No is a Beautiful Word. And tell me what got you going to start writing chapters or gathering thoughts about the word no. Nobody likes to say no.
Yeah, that's a great question. I actually, I've been working on this book for 10 years. It's what I call one of my fun books. I have two books that I've been writing, one for 20 years, one for 10 years, that I didn't plan on publishing, didn't plan on, just for me, it's therapeutic.
10 years. It's 45,000 pages long.
Exactly right. No, but it is 68 chapters. We can talk about that. It is 68 chapters, but the chapters range from one paragraph to 3 pages. But I really got going on this because of people I love and care about who would say the same thing to me, and this could be like a retired person who everyone's got them volunteering on things, or a homeschool parent, or a corporate executive. They'd say, "Man, I just have such a hard time saying no." And their lives are overwhelmed. They're just saturated with things they didn't want to be doing, and all of a sudden they're looking, going, "How did I get here?" And then they say, "I'm just not good at saying no." And my response has always been, "Oh no, you're great at saying no. If your life is full, when you say yes to when you say yes to a new thing, something falls off your plate. Something you're saying no to something. The problem is, it's not strategic." Mm-hmm. And so, out of concern for those folks, I was writing. I taught on this, shared about it, but just my writing was my own fun thing to do. And then a couple years ago, one of my publishers came and said, "What are you working on?" And I said, "Nothing really right now. I mean, I'm always working on something, but nothing I want to publish." And I talked with one of these acquisitions editors about what I was working on, and a week later he sent me a contract and said, "Here, we'll publish it." And I said, "Well, I wasn't really thinking about that." And I should have told him no, I shouldn't have. But I prayed about it, thought about it, and said, "Yeah, it's time that I share this with people."
Why do we struggle? When I read this manuscript, I hope, like a lot of people, I thought, man, did you just write this for me? I really do struggle with saying no. Yeah. It's hard. No one's ever trained me. I am a people pleaser. And so why do we struggle so much with that?
Well, you just said 3 things. It's hard, nobody ever taught me, and I'm a people pleaser.
I should do a book.
This is a brilliant interviewer. But it's hard. It's hard, man. Nobody likes to say no. What parent wants to look at their little kiddo or grandparent, grandson or granddaughter, and say no? It's no fun. It's difficult. We're not taught. As a little kid, you say no a lot, and honey, don't say no. Honey, don't say no. And what we should say is, honey, there's times to say no. This isn't the right time. But we don't learn this. And I think a big problem for those who are people of faith is that we have this sense that a loving, caring person will say yes. We have this idea that maybe, and if your worldview is a Christian worldview, we have this idea that Jesus always says yes. I preached this last Sunday at my church on this topic, and my main focus is the fact that Jesus said no and God says no. And if God says no, it's okay for us to say no. Most Christians don't believe that or don't realize that.
Let's talk about some examples. Now, you mentioned your chapters, and this is really a book that does the reader a service. You say right off the bat, I'm going to give you one example and move on. I'm not going to belabor the point. And as I read through your 68 chapters, it was delightful how short they were. You really honored that commitment to the reader. But one of your early chapters, I think number 4, says, "No is a beautiful word," which is where you took the title from. So can you kind of dive into why no is a beautiful word?
Yeah, because if a situation comes up and you say yes to something you really shouldn't be doing. And I use the image at the beginning of the book of a buffet, where you get a plate, you're walking down the buffet line, and all of a sudden you realize halfway down the line your plate is completely full. And you look and they're cutting roast beef or prime rib, and there's no room. You just go, what have I done? I've overloaded myself. And no is a beautiful word, because when we say no to the wrong things, which could even be good things, we can say yes to the right things. It frees us and it brings joy, because you know the feeling. We all have it when we say, oh, sure, I'll help out. And then 2 minutes later we're going, what did I just do? And we feel discouraged and oppressed, and the other person was being kind. They invited you or asked you, but once you said yes, I'll help with the Girl Scout cookie sales, and that's meetings every Wednesday till Jesus returns, or yes, I'll show up and be part of that, and then after one or two times you think, well, I really didn't think this through. So it's a beautiful word, because it actually can align us with what matters most. I find that most people aren't making decisions most of the time between good and bad things. They're making decisions between good and good things, or good and better things, or even great things and what we're called to. And if we're going to be able to have margin to do the most important things, we need to be able to say no. And so that's why it makes it a beautiful word, because when we say it, we can say yes to the best things.
I have gotten to the end of those buffet lines with a plate full of potato salad and Jell-O. And what do you know? There's shrimp waiting for me and nowhere to put it, and it kind of gets messed up in the Jell-O.
And it always looks bad if you walk down the buffet line with 3 plates too. You got to just take one plate. You got to look dignified, and you got to be strategic.
So people, what happens to a person when, as you've written about several of these, when, like you said, they say yes to good things. They want to say yes to volunteer on this board and that program and help out the school with this and do that. What have you seen in people's lives who mean to do well but overload their plate?
Boy, a whole list of things. One of the biggest things, and you can see it, you'll look at people and they're just tired. They're exhausted. They just look spent. And in some cases, maybe their attitude's still pretty good, but you can tell they're grinding. And when a person's, I just don't believe that that's God's intention, that we grind through everything in life. Is it God's intention that we grind through some things? Yes. To follow Jesus is to take up your cross. To follow Jesus is to pursue Him with all that you are. And that costs everything. He gave everything. He calls everything out of us. But there's also a sense of joy and freedom when we're on the right path. And so if we're in our area of gifting, our area of passion, our area of calling, John, I've known you for years. I can tell when you're doing something you're passionate about. And through our years, I can tell when you're like, yeah, I have to get this done. It's a whole different experience. And the end product of those things may be all good things. But there's a spirit in us. So I think that there's a sense of a weight and a heaviness and a tiredness and a mental, emotional exhaustion. And another thing is there's regret. There's this constant sense of, I'll do it because I said so, but man, I wish I hadn't. And even as I'm saying that, I know there's people listening right now that are going, man, that's like half the things I do.
Right.
But I really hope that our conversation will get people thinking in a fresh new way, because I know before we're done, we're going to talk about some things that will set people free. And then also I think there is a reality that for many people, they do become bitter. They become angry. They become resentful. And not everyone, but there's some people that when they've said yes, and it was, they'll say, it was my own fault, but I can't help the fact that I now resent that person for putting me in a corner, for pressuring me. And they might have been pressuring, they might not have been, but it feels like that over time. And when we get in that place, we're getting kind of, there's a red light flashing on the dashboard. Be careful.
Now, we don't want to just turn into selfish people. So one of the reasons we don't say no when we're asked to do this, that, or the other thing is, we're just trying to be kind. And so how do we say no without turning into jerks?
Yeah. Well, one of my favorite chapters of the Bible is Mark chapter 1. And it's Jesus. It's the most comprehensive picture of a day in the life of Jesus. And it starts at one day, early in the day, and it finishes early the next day. Almost 24 hours where we get a snapshot of a day in the life of Jesus. And so he starts out in the synagogue. He's teaching. He does he sets people spiritually free. He begins healing ministry. And later in the day when he's at the mother-in-law of one of his friends' home, and then this after Sabbath ends, the people crowd around the house, and there's a revival meeting, and he's setting people free spiritually. He's casting out demons. He is teaching. He's healing. Finally, it doesn't even say at some point everyone's exhausted. They go to sleep. But the next morning, Jesus gets up really early, goes to a quiet place, which he did regularly to meet with the Father. The disciples, when they wake up, realize, oh, Jesus is gone. He went and found a quiet place to meet with the Father because that's what Jesus did. They find him and they say, Jesus, everyone's looking for you. Everyone wants you, Jesus. And they're really saying, come back to town. More teaching, more healing, more setting people free. That's what they want. So come on back. And Jesus, in effect, looks at them and he says, no. He says, we're going to the next town and the town after that because my mission is to come and preach. And so I did what I did there. That was the right thing to do. He was Jesus. He always did the right thing. But then he said, I'm moving on to the next town. And he said, no, you have to believe there were a lot of people back at that town going, man, I didn't make it to the revival meeting, but I got I came now, or I brought my child or my friend to be healed or to be set free. And now Jesus moved on. Man, he let us down. If you learn to say no, you're going to let people down. Now, you don't have to be a jerk. You can do it kindly. And in the book, I give 20 different ways to say no. I give a whole menu, and it's really kind of fun because it ranges from no, never, I'm offended you asked me, don't ever ask me again. That's kind of a nuclear no. That's a big one. To just no thanks. And so part of it is in the way you ask the question, how do you do it without being a jerk? It's how you say it. But here's the reality. I've learned through the years that about 80% of people, when you say no, about 80% are like, all right. And they just and they're cool with it. They about 10% actually appreciate it, and they'll say, man, you really did that well, and that was really thoughtful, and you get a chance to teach them what you're learning about saying no. And about 10% are going to go, you're mean, you're not nice, and you, no matter how diplomatic, and I'm not as kind and gentle a person as you are by nature. I'm a really direct guy, but I've really crafted my skill of saying no, and even when I am as careful and thoughtful and prayerful, I do it as the best I can. There's people who get upset with me. And then you have to buy my next new book. No, this doesn't exist, but I've thought about writing a book called The Power of Apathy. And just how there's points where you have to say, you know what, I did the best I can. I can't lose sleep over the fact that you are unhappy, that you still can't control my life. Because when you tell some people no and they're used to controlling you,
right,
they're like, oh, now I can't get what I want out of you.
Couple of examples that are coming to my mind when I did read the book. Let me just bring them up to you.
Yeah.
One, you serve a large church in Monterey, California, and there's just a lot of people. As the lead pastor, you're very public. They all see you, and you're looking out over how many thousands of faces. So there's one story in the book after church, a new couple that you would love to embrace said, hey, it's so great to be here. We're new in town or whatever. Would you and Sherry be able to come over to our house? We'd love to serve you dinner this week. Can you remember that story?
Oh, my goodness. Yeah. And that story is a hybrid of about 50 or 75 stories because it happens regularly. And what happens is when someone comes to our church, and generally it's from a smaller church, they're used to a certain MO and way of doing things. And so they'll show up, and this couple came and they said, we've been checking out other churches in town. We're going to different churches. We came to this church and we actually got a gift book that Sharon and I wrote about called Finding a Church You Can Love. We used your advice. We went to churches for 4 weeks each, really experienced them, asked good questions, immersed ourselves. But we're going to make this our home church. We're so excited to be here, and we're putting roots down here. This is going to be our church. And I said, hey, fantastic. And then they said, so we need to get your calendar, and we need to find a time we can have you over for dinner. And even though I wrote a book about this, and this is a sweet couple, and they're just so kind, and they're excited, but they're assuming that the normative thing is now the next thing on our checklist. We like the church. We need to get to know you personally at the level of come to our home and have a dinner. And so one of my no's is no, but can I explain? I know I can't, but let me explain why I can't, because otherwise you might fill in the blanks with he doesn't care or he's is not sensitive to people, which isn't true. It's a raw time issue. It's a math issue here. And so I said, well, listen, and I asked them kind of what church they came from. It was a smaller church. And what I said to them is, well, in the church you came from, with the number of families there are, the pastor could probably, I think in their case, the pastor could have gone to every family's house for dinner at one time a week, do a dinner with a family, and hit every family twice in a year.
Right.
And I said, if our church was a third the size that it is, my wife and I, if we did 2 nights a week having dinner at people's homes, we couldn't get through a third of the congregation in 10 years. It's just a math issue. So I said, I actually said, we love people. We love hanging out with people. And I said, what we do in the church here is, I said, my wife and I are very involved in ministry. We build relationships constantly with people. When we get to know people, build a relationship, we have lots of dinners with friends. We go out, we go to their home, they come to our home. But we can't do on the front door when someone's coming to visit. We probably get 10 to 20 visitors a week. Well, there's not 10 to 20 dinner times a week, so I walked through that. And so now you can imagine right now, and I know your listeners are probably, here's a sweet young couple, they're, wide-eyed, excited. When can we have dinner with you? And I walk them through this, kindly, and you're, thinking, okay, how would I have said that? I was as kind as I could be, and I finished, and their eyes weren't as bright, and they were kind of not as excited. And I said, hey, listen, is that a deal breaker for the two of you? Is that going to be a deal breaker? And they actually looked at each other and they said, no, we love this church. And they said, thanks for explaining it. They said, it's kind of sad. I mean, that, because they said, but we've always been a small churches. And I said, well, there's things about this church that were appealing to you that only a large church can offer. And the reality is the average church in America is 75 to 85 people. And I love small churches. I just don't happen to pastor one right now. And they actually were like, nope, it's not a deal breaker, and we love this church, we're here. And I said, listen, over time, if we end up crossing paths and serving the Lord together, build a relationship, we may get to do that. But we'll have to wait and see.
Did they stay?
It's a big church, so
You don't know?
I've seen them a couple times since then, and I can't. Our database has 18,000 people in it, and we have about 6,000 to 7,000 regular attenders, and 3 services. So it's tricky.
Yeah.
But I do actually on the main floor where the lighting is really good, and when I see everybody, I know when people are missing or when they're present, what service they come to, and.
Well, that was one that struck me, is how you handled that. And what you did there was you explained.
Yeah.
You gave no with an explanation, and then you didn't force it beyond that. You let them accept or reject that explanation, but I found that helpful. Here's another example in the book, and it comes to something that every one of us deals with, and that is alcohol. So if you're at a dinner party at some place and someone says, hey, Kevin, would you like, what would you like? You like a beer? You like a whiskey? You like some wine? You've already thought through your response to that. How do you handle that situation?
Yeah, that's one of my automatic no's. And the interesting thing is it's not a moral thing. It's not a Christian thing. Jesus made wine, and from what I could tell in the biblical text, pretty good wine. And so it's not Jesus wasn't a wine maker, but he made wine. And so what I think about when on that topic is it's very complex because we live in a culture where I'm in an area that's kind of wine country area. There's lots of vineyards. Some of my board members actually own vineyards, or they have kind of hobby vineyards. And so for me, it went back to my childhood. I grew up in a home with 4 generations of alcoholics in my family, from my dad to his father, and then one of my siblings is an alcoholic. And so at 13 years old, my dad's mother sat me down, and we called her Granny, and she was just one of the most gracious, kind. In an extended family of over 100 people, she was the only Christian that I knew of. And at that time, now there's many Christians in our family, but she sat me down and she said, Kevin, she says, your dad, my son Terry, my firstborn son, is an alcoholic. And he is going to damage his life because of alcohol. My grandfather I never met, he literally died in a gutter in New York City. He was a drunk and they found him dead. And when she went back through the generations, she told me our story. There's power in story, especially when your granny tells you a story. And then she looked at me and she said, will you promise me you'll never drink? I wasn't a Christian, hadn't thought about Christianity, but I'm looking in the eyes of my granny and she says, will you promise me you'll never drink? And I actually said to her, well, I've already started drinking. I'd already drunk, not a lot, but I was already drinking some, and I was a pretty wild kid. And she says, well, will you promise me you'll never drink again? And I thought about it, and I looked at her and I said, I promise I'll never drink again. Now, when I became a Christian and a pastor, and I realized I'm going to deal with lots of people with substance abuse issues, and they'll always say, well, do you drink? And when you're talking with a person with a substance issue, they'll ask you, do you do it? And I thought, well, it'd be nice to be able to say, actually, I've made a decision not to. But I know lots of pastors who drink responsibly, and that's their choice. But in my case, I made that decision, and I literally have not even had a sip of champagne or anything since I was 13 years old. I quit drinking when I was 13. That's kind of my story. and so, but here's the reality now. When somebody asks me, it's really easy. And I got a buddy of mine who cracked open a $2,000 bottle of wine on my firstborn son's wedding day, and gave it to them to enjoy. And if I ever want to try like a little sip of, at least maybe take a sip, $100 sip of wine or something. But I just said no thanks, and people know that. And what's interesting is like I went to a dinner one time that had 7 courses of food paired with 7 different alcoholic beverages, and my my glass, all 7 of my glasses just stayed empty. And at events like that, after a while, you stop getting invited to those things because they realize, oh, he's not going to drink, and a big part of his drinking. So actually, that no costs me something, but I'm okay with that. And the nice thing is, I don't even know if my physiological response to alcohol at this point would be addictive. I think it probably would be because my personality, I'm like, well, John, you've known me for years. When I love something, I love it a lot.
Right.
And so I think I probably would go for it.
Yeah.
And so it's nice to not have that even in front of me. But here's the bottom line. There's something about identifying certain things in advance where you say, my answer is going to be no. Every time, all the time, till Jesus returns. My answer is just no. And once you've decided that, it gets really easy. Because you just kind of come up with your little menu of no's. You say, hey, no thanks, no, let me explain. No, but feel free to yourself, whatever it is. Be polite, be kind. And now I have friends that just keep lots of Martinelli cider around. And so when they'll get a nice little champagne glass, pour me some cider. And I love to hang out and visit with people while they're chatting and talking. And I just can't talk about the wine because I'm not drinking it.
I think it's really helpful, Kevin, that you, by you making a stand and a commitment explaining that, you actually give permission to other people who deeply desire to find their way to that same place but have not had the courage or the language. I'm wrapping these up. The first one was, will you have dinner with us? The second was, can I serve you wine? Now, the third one that you talk about in your book has to do with an issue that has brought down many a pastor, and that is some sort of illicit sexual engagement. And, just because you're in the ministry and married, apparently you're not bulletproof. I've known you for a long time. How have you decided, and for how long have you decided, how are you going to address the reality of sexual temptation in the church and in your position?
Well, I was going to say, when I turned 13, I decided not to ever have sex.
Granny put that to me.
Granny said, Kevin, no. What the reality is, I have three sons. I have one wife, and I'm a huge fan of sex, as long as it's within the boundaries that God has. And so for me, it's just having very clear and very sensible boundaries. And these are boundaries actually that I put in place when I was in college. And when I was in college, I grew up in Southern California. One of the schools I went to was kind of a beach school, a community college. And so it was very enticing. And there were lots of opportunities. And I had to make some decisions just to even – I kind of look at it like if you had a property, a home property, and your back lot line was the edge of the Grand Canyon, and you had kids. You wouldn't say to the kids, hey, don't go within 2 or 3 feet. You'd like put a fence 50 feet back from the. I mean, you just think I'm not going to have my kids dancing on the edge of destruction here. I'm gonna put up some clear boundaries. Well, for me, it's just saying no to certain things. And in the book, I talk about kind of having specific boundaries, and these are mine. When I share them, I tell people you've got to come up with your own boundaries. I had a person in my church when I was in West Michigan here who was in a very high elected office, and she said, I have meetings with men. I have to. My job dictates that. I completely understand. I just, she was just careful of the signals she sent off, and keeping her own kind of boundaries. But for me, I won't. If you saw me out to dinner with a woman alone, it's going to be my wife or a family member. If my little sister comes into town or something, I could have dinner with her. But you're never going to see me out for dinner one-on-one with a woman other than my wife. I'm a pastor. I also have to look at appearances. And I also understand the emotional entanglements that come when, I won't go out for a movie with a woman alone. And, now Sherry and I, my wife and I will double date with friends, and that's great. And then I won't drive, some people don't understand this. I won't drive in a car alone with a woman. Especially in our world today, one accusation. I mean, look at our world today. I mean, this is stuff I was doing 30 years ago. But right now, one accusation can cost you, if not cost you your job or your future, it can cost a lot of years and time of anxiety and worry as people try to sort out what really happened. So, if you go, well, there can't be a he says, she says in my life because there's never a he, she alone where they can say anything unless it's completely fabricated. And so for me, it's really a matter of saying I need to be very, very careful and create clear boundaries. And then also there's lots of no's there. If I tell a story in the book about a woman who just came up to me and basically offered herself to me when I was taking a German class in college, and she just said, Herr Harney, I'd enjoy I won't say the specifics, but I enjoy spending time with you. You'd like to spend time with me. And it was funny. I looked at her and I said, well, I have a girlfriend, and I don't even have sex with her. Mm-hmm. And I write in the book, I said, she looked at me like I just said, I eat kittens as a delicacy. She looked at me like, are you insane? Mm-hmm. And she said, why? And it gave me a chance to say, well, these are the reasons why I've chosen not to. And I think she was asking why I don't have sex with my girlfriend at that point, not with her. But I said, I really believe that God has designs and boundaries for this. And I try to live within that. And I believe that's the best option for a flourishing life and for meaning. And it was great with my wife and I to be able to talk with each of our sons and talk about the fact that we greatly desired each other, but we said no to each other. For years, we said no to each other. And sometimes my wife still says no to me. No. but that's a different podcast. But to be able to say to our boys, we practice saying no with each other. And here's the beauty of it, John. Because my wife and I, for a number of years before we got married, said no to each other consistently, once we were married, we could say no to other people who might want to intrude into the sacredness of our relationship. So boundaries and then living them out over and over again.
So the thing I know about, this is the No Shame podcast, and we're talking to Kevin Harney and his new book, No is a Beautiful Word, and we've just described 3 no's. Now, you might be listening thinking, what a fuddy-duddy. This guy must be really one of those guys, lives in a rock, a hermit, kind of puts a shawl around his head and yells at kids who run in his lawn. Not true. What is the concordant yes that has resulted from each of those 3 decisions? Let's talk about your church, let's talk about the alcohol, and then let's talk about your marriage. Because of the no's that you've just described to us, what kind of things have you been blessed with, have been fruitful in your life, and have given you joy?
So take it one at a time. Start with the church.
Yeah.
So not long ago, I was preaching, and I actually made reference to the fact that my wife and I are committed to each other at a level that we have said no to each other before we were married, and we say no to others now when there's potential temptations, talked about boundaries. And John, the congregation broke into applause. And the church I pastor is a great church, but they're not prone to, after a great musical number, they'll break into applause. Rarely in the middle of a sermon. I don't know why, but
appropriate, I would say.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you. As a musician, I appreciate that. But I honestly, I was at the moment shocked and pleased. People's response was, yes, we long for that. I think the example for other people in a culture that says no boundaries, do whatever you want, and in the culture that says that kind of freedom leads to the greatest joy, I would say no. That kind of I put quote marks in the area. That kind of freedom doesn't lead to joy. It leads to bondage. Mm-hmm. It leads to people being afraid and covering up because they're afraid what their spouse will find out. It leads to fear about compromise. And so I think the greatest freedom comes when we have clear boundaries. Just like folks letting their kids out in that backyard on the edge of the Grand Canyon. If there's no fence there, they're constantly craning their neck, looking out the window, standing. But if there's a clear boundary, they're like, hey, we're okay. Mm. And so I live my life as a pastor, being clear, I never drop my guard. I'm still very cautious, but I have incredible joy. If somebody comes into my office, and I meet with women in my office, but the door's open or I have a big window and the shade's up and my assistant's right outside. I mean, I connect with women. I have great relationships with women. I just am careful about certain behaviors that could create an environment for something to go wrong or the appearance that something could be going wrong. But there's incredible joy, incredible freedom, and honestly, it protects my soul. Mm-hmm. I've watched, you mentioned about just how many people this has become something that's on the radar of compromise that's happened with leaders and what it does. And I don't want to be a statistic in that litany of people and stories that are being told. I want to be one who runs the race to the end and says, people say, boy, he loved his wife. He was faithful to his wife. He loved his church. He was faithful to his church. And boy, if my son or daughter could learn from that example, and the ultimate example is Jesus, not me. But if parents can say, boy, wouldn't it be great if you lived that way? I'd love to have that legacy.
So there's been a positive side to fidelity. When you say no to infidelity, you're saying yes to fidelity, and that has led to, in Kevin's case, a beautiful marriage, a beautiful family. Professionally, I've known you for years, way back to 2 or 3 churches ago, where you began to identify, this part of the ministry I can let this pastor cover, this part of the ministry, because you identified what you were most passionate about, which was teaching and evangelism, and you're compassionate, you care about people in the hospital, but when you have 1,000 people in your church, if you visit everybody so you made those decisions long ago, sort of embodied by that story of can you have dinner at our house. Yeah. What's been the circumstantial yes that's come about by you identifying your greatest strengths? How's that worked professionally for you?
Yeah, one of the things that I will tell leaders is you don't have to do everything. You may have to make sure everything gets done. You have to have the right people, the right team of people. But John, what it's done for me by being able to say, I can focus on where I am most gifted and most called is to be able to hone those skills and those gifts. Now, pastors in a smaller church of 75 or 100 people, they're a jack of all trades. And that person is doing a little bit of everything, and that's part of the deal. When I pastored a small church in West Michigan, and when I began serving in this church, it was quite a small church. I brought communion to the homes of shut-ins and brought my guitar along. And I'm not a musician like you are at that level, but I'd sing a couple songs. We'd break the bread and share the cup together. And it was beautiful, and I loved doing that. But in a congregation the size of the one I serve now, I simply can't do that. So a couple things it's done that's wonderful. Number one, it's unleashed me to focus on what I'm best at and most passionate about and called to do. And so I do. I spend most of my time preaching and teaching, doing high-level visionary leadership. And then I've got a passion for people that don't know the love of God to hear about Jesus. And so I help people learn to do that. And a part of what I'm doing is trying to equip thousands of people in our church and tens of thousands of people around the globe to do that sort of thing. So it unleashes what's best in me, and it maximizes what's best. It minimizes the things that I'm really, honestly, not that good at. There's different tests that show different spiritual gifts, and so they vary in numbers. But say there's 20 spiritual gifts. If I'm trying to do all 20 of those things, I'm going to be exhausted. Here's the reality. I'm pretty good at 3 of them. I'm horrible at the other 17. So when I take these tests, some I score like a 0 on. I mean, I'm really bad. And so it's like, you don't want me doing that. Honestly, you don't want, if I go in for a surgery, I want to look at that doctor and go, this is a specialist who's done 1,000 of these, not, I do a lot of things, and this is kind of like the other one I did. I think it'll work out. I want somebody who goes, man, this is what I do. And so it unleashes me. But the second thing is that it actually unleashes other people, because now I'm compelled to equip other people, because everything has to get done. So I'm equipping and I'm training and I'm developing leaders all the time. Part of my leadership is leading leaders. And so I'm unleashing other people to do what they're best at. And I'll say, John, I got to walk through John's place of work here, and I got to see the different people. And you introduced me to probably 6 or 7 people this morning that are here diligently working. And this one specializes in this and this, and it was very specific. But I thought, what you're doing here is exactly what I do in the church. You are equipping specific people and finding that they're gifting, and they get to do sound engineering, or they get to do one of them was, what was it? The pictures, the little sheep,
right? Animations,
animation, and well, that's what they do. What? Because they love it, because they're good at it. And now they're thriving. And so not only do you thrive when you say no, but you say yes to other people so they can thrive.
If you're listening to the No Shame podcast and any of this is resonating with you, and you're kind of like I did when I read this book, thinking, boy, I could use this kind of guidance in my life. The book is called No is a Beautiful Word by Kevin G. Harney, and I would really encourage you to get it because the chapters are short, and he'll teach you how to be gracious and winsome when you put some no's in your life, so that the things you say yes to are the things that you are called to be saying yes to. And I want to transition that gracious and winsome. That's a theme, Kevin, that you've really brought into another entire arena that you are involved in, and that's evangelism. Who likes evangelism?
Nobody. Here, and John, let me say, as we shift gears there, I do want to let you know, I did this book. I got to go into a studio in Burbank, California, and record this book. Oh. And so I actually listened to my own book, which I've never done before. I've recorded other books. I've never listened to them. And it's really a great listen, too. So for those of your listeners, these are listening people. It's available as a download, and I actually read the book, and that's a fun way to go through it as well.
How many languages did you record, by the way? Because I know you speak fluent French.
Yes, I recorded in every language that somebody would want to listen to me in. Which would be one. So the question about evangelism, it's a funny thing. One of the things I've heard said in different ways in different places is basically this. One of the few things that Christians and non-Christians agree on is that we don't like evangelism. Right. And so, Christians get sweaty palms and dry mouths and run for the door, and non-Christians go, oh, it's one of those evangelists. But I believe that people are drawn to Jesus. And all evangelism really is trying to introduce people to the one who loves them more than anybody in all the world. And so if we understand what evangelism is, and I don't even use the word evangelism, I use the term organic outreach. Evangelism is a great word. It's a biblical word. It's about good news. It's about sharing the good news, but it's been so tainted by misconceptions and misunderstandings. I talk about organic outreach, which is naturally reaching out to people who don't know the greatness of God's love and the magnitude of His grace, and the power of who he is, and in some way being able to naturally reach out to them and share the story of Jesus, both in how he's transformed me and how he can transform you.
Naturally, organic. That's what the word organic means, right?
Yep.
That's why you've locked onto that word. So can you kind of give me an example of what is a natural way to share the fact that we are loved by a creator who will put us in the palm of his hands and count the hairs on our head and know our name, versus the kind of thing that has given evangelism, I'll say, a bad name? What about it has turned people sour?
Yeah. Well, the thing about it being natural or organic is that there's just thousands of ways to do it. It's as unlimited as the kinds of personalities of those who share and the personalities of those who listen. So when I talk about organic, partly it is out of who you are. If your temperament and personality is more direct and blunt, and you start to share with a friend about Jesus in a really kind of a weird, subtle, soft way, they're going to go, "Who are you? What? You're a direct person." So it's out of who you are and out of who Jesus is. And so it's not that there's one method or model. There's one story. There's one Jesus. There's one gospel, one good news. But it can be shared in countless different ways. And part of the problem is it becomes inorganic is that for some people, they just they memorize a text and try to do it like somebody else would do it. So what I try to teach people is how to share your story of how God has impacted your life, because that's your story. And your story, John, I know your story. It's totally different than my story. I grew up in a non-believing home. You grew up in a pastor's home. You can't get much more different than I grew up on the Southern California coast. You grew up in the Midwest. And so you go, well, man, they're
Phoenix.
different. Phoenix, the middle of the west part of Phoenix. Well, I've known you always as Charlotte.
right.
When did you move to Charlevoix?
I moved from Scottsdale, Arizona, where I grew up, to northern Michigan as a high school freshman. So it has been a long time.
Okay,
Yeah.
good. Yeah, so the middle of Arizona and the middle of Michigan.
Yeah,
at the
yeah.
top. So now I forgot what was your question?
Well, you're talking to us saying, this is interesting because, okay, we're both golfers. Actually, Kevin's a better golfer than I, and that's because he lives near Pebble Beach and has more talent. But I do love golf. We took one of my favorite trips about 15 years ago. We golfed every course in Ireland and Scotland together. So I've seen how, for example, someone will say, I cannot keep my driver in the fairway still after all these years. Every other club in my bag works pretty well, but the driver and I have had it. So anyone who's ever tried to teach me how to drive has always taught me how they drive.
Yeah.
It's still not working for me. If I try to do evangelism and pretend I'm Kevin Harney or pretend I'm Billy Graham or pretend I'm whoever, you're telling me that that's as poor of a choice as trying to hit a driver in a method that's not my own. And you're saying there's a way that I could discover to share what God has done for me and as I've seen it more organically than me copying somebody, right?
Yeah, well, and what a great example. Because, John, you do that. You share the gospel all over the world through video. You create films, short films and long films, and woven in it. And I've watched enough of those. Woven into it is the story of Jesus. Not every one in the same way. You do a whole breadth of different things. But I've seen you tell the story. Somebody says, well, but wait, you're not on a soapbox standing on a street corner yelling at people. That's evangelism. No, it's not. Now, might there have been a time, and even today, some places where that might be effective? Maybe. Not for me, not for you, maybe for somebody. I'm careful not to kind of beat other people up. Now, I think that forcing things down people's throats will generally cause them to throw up. And so I don't advise that. But John, your way of communicating, I've seen you bring the story of Jesus alive through music. Through a whole series of Christmas Rock Vespers concerts that you did with a whole team, with Dwight and with a whole team of friends, and that people could invite non-church friends there, non-believing friends, and they could hear the story of Christmas in a fresh new way. Does that count?
Does that count?
Yeah, of course it counts. Yeah. And you know what? Could I do it that way? No, I'm not doing films. I'm not doing Christmas concerts. But you have, because that's organic to who you are. And let me ask you: did those things feel natural to who you are?
They make you feel alive.
Yeah. And probably some of the greatest joy in your life has been seeing the light of the presence of Jesus come alive in someone's eyes and heart and life, because you've, in a way that fits how God has made you, uniquely shared that story. And so for some people, it's and then there's things that kind of open the door to tell the story of Jesus, the way we serve and love and care and bring compassion. I don't think we can bring God-changing truth without bringing God-changing love. They go, Jesus came in grace and truth. So there was a gracefulness, but they were speaking the truth, and those go hand in hand. And so I think there's as many different ways to share the story as there are people and relational connections, but the story of the greatness of God's love, the need of humanity, the offer of Jesus' life, death, and resurrection, and the chance to not only receive his love and friendship, but also take his hand and follow him as the leader of your life. That story gets woven in many different ways.
So we've been talking with Kevin Harney, and the new book, No is a Beautiful Word, and we've transitioned into the work you're doing with the Organic Outreach Ministry, which is all over the world, by the way. I know you and your wife, Sherry, have traveled many, many countries. When we talk about no and yes, right, and this is a big macro question, but people say no to God as they understand God. Sometimes they specifically say no to Christianity, and sometimes they specifically say no to Jesus. That's a no. And then you've seen people turn that no into a yes to God, to Jesus, to the love of Christ. Can you just say a couple words from the viewpoint you've been given to sort of travel? I know you're going to be in Australia in a few weeks. You were recently in Alaska. You're in all these countries. What's going on our planet? Are we post-Christian? Is Christianity yesterday's news? What have you seen?
Wow. Well, the world has never been a Christian world because countries aren't Christian or not Christian. People are Christian. And so the idea that a nation is a Christian nation. Now, can a nation be heavily influenced by biblical thought patterns? Can a world be more aligned with the Judeo-Christian values? Absolutely. And that's changed. But, there's no country in the world that's ever been a Christian country because countries aren't going to heaven. People are going to heaven. And so I think that there's shifting happening on a global level. I'm convinced that a huge amount of it is due to our ability to communicate and the accessibility of information. The world has always been really rough. In Noah's days, the world was pretty bad. As a matter of fact, so bad that God said it's time to clean house here. And so when people say the world's never been worse, I always say, well, it has been. And also what's really interesting to me is that people in the Western world, Christians in the Western world will often say things are just horrible, they're as bad as they can get. But I know you've done work and done filming on places where Christians are being consistently martyred and killed for their faith. That's not happening in most of the Western world yet.
Right.
I don't know if it will ever happen. It could happen, but it's not happening right now. But we tend to look and go, all is lost. And I just don't believe that. I believe that God is still on the throne. I believe that Jesus' good news still transforms lives. And I believe oftentimes in the darkest and most difficult of times and cultures is when Christians can make a decision to do that organic outreach, that natural reaching out with the love of Jesus in a way that in an apathetic time of safety and everything's going well. So and I think probably our biggest challenge right now is our own prosperity and our own self-consumption. We live in a time where people can binge watch and do shows on Hulu and Netflix and other vendors, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 hours a night, where people can sit and play video games, have the luxury of playing video games 20, 25 hours a week until they move up a list of different. I mean, there's things that draw us in that we can spend hours on a little media screen in our hand or on a tablet, and it becomes our focal point. And so, I think one of our greatest challenges is just attention, that we don't pay attention to what matters most. And then this goes back to the topic of no. I think we need to start saying no to more and more things. And yes, I talked with a leader recently who said, was working with high school students, and he said, I've been told that most high school, most boys get engaged in pornography now. And this is not like when I was a kid, like somebody tore a page out of a Playboy and it's a picture of a young woman from the waist up undressed. It's not that. It's video of everything you can imagine, everything you can't imagine. Third grade. Imagine the confusion in the mind and the heart of a third grade little boy who sneaks away and watches 30 minutes of this a day. And so it ends up being around what's that, 3.5 hours a week, and then that's 14 hours a month, and that's 140 hours a year, and it starts to increase. So by the time they're in high school, we're talking over 1,000 hours. And we wonder, why are they being drawn away from God? Why are they so distracted? Why there's all this available, and I don't know the answer to it. I have no idea, except that I talked with parents the other day who said, "Oh no, our kids don't have smartphones, and they're in high school." And they have tablets through school, and we have complete access. And actually, if they want extra 30 minutes on this video game, they have to submit approval from us. So it's like a police state. No, that's just good parenting. And so we're in an interesting world where there's all these distractions and everything available to us. And I think that honestly, the gospel needs to begin first in our own homes. And we're losing a generation of young people who are wandering away. I think not because the world is that much different, but because parents have abdicated any leadership in their kids' lives to the media.
I've come that you might have life and that you might have it more abundantly. All these no's, do they lead you down into a ditch with a straitjacket on, or do they set you free in your experience and with what you've seen?
I don't know anyone who has a better life than I do.
Yeah.
And I say that believing that your listeners could say the same thing.
Yeah.
I believe that when we say no to I'm in a time in life, John, where I don't really say no very often to really bad, horrible, bad, horrible opportunities, because I've got lots of great opportunities. My plate is full. My life is full of wonderful things, and so I'm saying no to good or great or amazing things. And it still makes me happy because I'm saying yes. And and here's 4 big things that when we don't say no that fall off our plate usually. Our relational world with our children, if we're parents, our grandchildren. If we're married, our relationship with our spouse falls off the plate. The care of our own health, our physical health falls off the plate. And then also our spiritual walk, our walk with Jesus. And we start loading on things that aren't as important, and the things that are most important fall off. And sometimes we don't notice they fall off the plate for weeks or months or years. And so I find it the best life possible. And I think sometimes if we look at our plate and say, okay, I can't put anything more on this in my life, it's full, then say, what can I take off so I can put on the things that matter the most? And you will find a level of joy and peace and wholeness that you've never experienced before.
It's Kevin Harney, author of No is a Beautiful Word, and our guest on the No Shame podcast. I can tell you not only this book, I would recommend that you read it. I would recommend that you give it away as well to somebody, because this book we call No Shame at the intersection of faith and culture. The first half or more of this book is just cultural. I mean, it's just for anybody who's busy in their business or busy in their school or overburdened in their responsibilities. People are going to be nodding their heads and going, boy, I get to this. About 2/3 of the way through, you start to share your own testimony, and you move from the culture to the faith side of this thing. And by that time, your readers are already engaged and in a friendly. I think this book can reach anybody who feels like they'd like to have some better yeses in their life. I thank you for not saying no to my invitation, to showing up today.
Yeah.
It's been great, and we appreciate you very much, and I recommend everyone look it up. No is a Beautiful World. Thank you, Kevin.
You're welcome. Thank you.